Lee effect is a catalyst. It's a spotlight to those places that don't have a spotlight. It's a marketing platform. It's absolutely free.
A homeless man films a food review from his car. Within 24 hours, the restaurant he visited has lines around the block and makes $500,000. This is Keith Lee, and one video from him can save a dying business or destroy it completely. But 3 years ago, he was living in that same car with nothing. This is how brutal honesty became the most dangerous weapon in the food industry. Keith Lee broke every rule the internet told him to follow. No fancy cameras, no sponsorships, no fake reactions, just truth. And it made him more powerful than any food critic in history. But with that power came a price. The crushing weight of knowing your words controls someone's entire future. This is the story of how one man's struggle became his greatest strength, and why his journey proves authenticity always wins. Before Keith Lee was reviewing restaurants, he was getting his face smashed in for money. He fought as a professional MMA athlete in regional circuits where the pay was brutal. Most fighters outside the UFC make between $1,000 and $3,000 per fight, and after you subtract training fees, medical bills, and travel costs, there's barely anything left. Keith dedicated years to combat sports, pushed his body to the limit, and got poverty in return. The math was simple and crushing. His fighting career led him to the one place no fighter wants to end up, living in his car with his family's future crumbling and no backup plan in sight. Most people break at rock bottom. Keith pulled out his phone. In 2020, Keith started filming food reviews on TikTok from that same car. No equipment, no production value, no script. The format was almost offensive in its simplicity. Order food, taste it on camera, rate it 1 to 10. His voice stayed calm whether he loved something or hated it. But he made one decision that changed everything. Keith paid for every single meal himself and refused all sponsorships. While every other food influencer was collecting checks and faking enthusiasm for whatever brand paid them, Keith was building something they couldn't buy: trust. In an industry drowning in fake reactions and paid promotions, honesty became his superpower. His authenticity wasn't strategy, it was survival. Keith couldn't afford fancy cameras, so he worked with what he had. He couldn't fake excitement because his fighter background taught him to stay composed under pressure. And he turned down sponsorships because selling out for quick money was exactly what had trapped him before. What looked like limitations became his greatest advantages. TikTok's algorithm detected something genuine and pushed his videos to millions of people starving for realness. Within months, viewers realized they'd found someone incorruptible. If Keith said something was an 8, it was an 8. If he gave a 5, he explained exactly why without sugarcoating. Restaurants couldn't buy him. PR companies couldn't manipulate him. He answered to nobody except viewers, who saw themselves in his working-class perspective. The followers came fast, but numbers don't tell the real story. The power showed up in what happened after his reviews went live. When Keith reviewed a small Atlanta spot called The Real Milk and Honey in 2022, their sales exploded 400% overnight. They hired emergency staff just to survive the chaos. A struggling Chicago restaurant he visited had lines stretching down the block for weeks. They made more money in 7 days than the previous 3 months combined. Business analysts started tracking what they called the Keith Lee effect. One video from him generated between $200,000 and $500,000 in immediate revenue. Small family restaurants considering bankruptcy suddenly had waiting lists. His influence transcended typical social media metrics. He was keeping businesses alive, creating jobs, and redistributing wealth from corporate chains to the underdogs. But this immense power came with immense pressure nobody talks about. Keith deliberately targeted small, minority-owned restaurants that couldn't afford PR campaigns or major advertising. These weren't establishments with Michelin stars, they were neighborhood spots run by immigrants and families grinding to survive in an industry with razor-thin margins where one bad month means closure. Keith understood their desperation because he'd lived it. When he walked into these restaurants and gave honest praise, he wasn't just recommending food, he was transferring attention and money from the powerful to the powerless. Traditional food critics wrote for elite audiences. Keith spoke for people who knew struggle, and his audience responded by showing up with their wallets open. Then came the real test. Major brands offered six-figure deals. PR firms tried buying access. Restaurant chains wanted him on permanent payroll. Keith refused everything. His rule was absolute. He pays for his food, never announces visits in advance, and his opinion cannot be purchased at any price. This decision cost him millions in potential earnings, but earned something more valuable: unshakable credibility. His audience knew every word was genuine, never scripted advertisement. That trust became his currency, worth more than any brand deal. While other food influencers chased sponsorships and faded into irrelevance, Keith's influence only grew stronger. But immense power creates immense consequences. Keith started receiving death threats from restaurant owners whose businesses suffered after negative reviews. Industry insiders accused him of destroying dreams with arbitrary ratings. Some restaurants couldn't handle the explosion of customers his reviews brought. They collapsed under sudden demand and blamed him for the chaos. The psychological weight became crushing. Keith spoke openly about severe anxiety, knowing one sentence from him could bankrupt a family or create overnight millionaires. He took breaks when necessary, set firm boundaries with his audience, refused to let his platform consume his mental health. Unlike influencers addicted to constant content, Keith prioritized his well-being over algorithm demands. And somehow, his audience loved him even more for the vulnerability. That honesty made him human in an industry of manufactured personalities. People weren't following a brand, they were following a man who climbed from homelessness to influence without selling his soul. He still films from his car, still pays for meals when he could demand everything free, still turns down deals that would make him rich beyond measure. His journey proves that your struggle can become your greatest advantage if you stay honest. Real always wins. Subscribe for more stories about people who changed the game by staying true.